Welcome to the University of KwaZulu-Natal here in Durban, South Africa. It's a real sunny winter's day. They say there is no winter in Durban because we have eternal summer. But yeah, there we go. We have beach festivals in winter, so that would tell you something about our climate. May I say a special word of welcome to the number of individuals who have expressed an interest to be part of this panel, and we've had responses from over 500 people who are participating in this particular webinar, which is very interesting to see the interest. And we have people from a range of contexts. Nationally, we've got people from UCT, from WITS, from Free State University, from Nelson Mandela University. In fact, all Northwest University, a whole range of universities are represented in the panel, in the participants at the moment. We also have a range of people from international contexts in Kenya, in Mauritius, in other African countries that are also participating. We have people from Norway, we have people from Germany, we have people from Australia, we have people from Lithuania. My goodness, that's quite a group of people interested in hearing about digital ways of knowing. So I think you are aware that this is going to be a panel discussion, and this particular panel discussion is going to take the form of focusing on digital ways of doctoral studies in COVID-19 times. And we're going to be drawing on a range of perspectives, a range of individuals from different countries in the international context. Just to set the scene, we do know that under the present circumstances, there's a tendency to focus on issues related to teaching and learning issues, pedagogy with respect to the undergraduate program largely. And we thought that this particular focus should shift also to postgraduate studies. Now, when we think about postgraduate studies, you're talking about supervision, you're talking about courses, you're talking about research endeavors, field work, etc. So postgraduate education too has a wide range of foci as well. We're choosing specifically to focus in this presentation on doctoral education as a form of postgraduate studies, in which the participants who are being brought into the panel have a range of experience of already working in digital ways or are in the process of setting up digitalized ways of doctoral education. And so we're going to hear these range of perspectives, some positive stories, some challenges, and some queries about the choices that we're making. I want to introduce our chair this afternoon, and who is one of the persons who's been active in bringing a collaborative network between Germany and the African continent and 11 centers of excellence across the continent, looking at the ways in which we could be using alternative pedagogies. So I'm welcoming Malva, who is Malva van Mollendorf from the University of Oldenburg, and she is going to be our chair. And then we also have an able assistant to Malva in the form of Johan van Niekerk, who is a person working in cybersecurity and has been, as he describes, been in online pedagogies and digital ways for as long as he knows and remembers. So he is currently operating from Norway and will assist us in the question and answer session. So with that, I'm handing over to Malva, who's going to be chairing the session. And thank you all for your participation. There's over 250 people now that are already in the web room listening to us as we begin. So over to you, Malva.
Thank you, Michael, and good afternoon to all of you from Oldenburg, all who have joined us from various places and who are interested in the perspectives that this webinar is focused on. maybe you are postgraduate education designers or coordinators of doctoral programs. Maybe you are supervisors or doctoral students, higher education managers. Welcome to everyone. As Michael said, we are many. Yes. Before we start with the introduction of the presenters, I was asked to say a few words regarding technical issues and the procedure for the webinar this afternoon. Due to the high number of participants, we cannot, unfortunately, include you visually. Your microphones are also all muted to minimize disturbing background noise. But of course, we would like you to participate in the webinar by using the questions and answers function and chat function. Yes, and we will try to group your common related questions and direct them to one of the presenters in the questions and answer session after the presentations. Yeah, when we heard that so many people have an interest and are joining the webinar, we asked Johan on very short notice and are very happy that he agreed to join us and to help at least read the questions and then try to make sense of them and group them together. So thank you very much, Johan, for supporting us. Yes, in that way we will try to cover as many questions as possible, but please forgive us if your question is not covered due to the tight schedule. We will keep our time slot of 2 hours and close the webinar at 4 p.m. South African time. Yes, to the procedure, we will have 4 presentations and 15 minutes each, then a 40-minute question and answer session, and a last statement and vote of thanks by the organizer of the webinar who brought us here together, Professor Samuel. During the presentations, the speakers will share their screens so that you can see their slides. If the presenter's pictures in your way, you can move that by clicking on it and moving it to the side. So I hope that works for everyone. Yeah, these were my technical remarks and I hope I didn't forget anything. Now, regarding the topic, in preparation of this webinar, we asked our 12 CERMISA doctoral students. CERMISA is the East and South African German Center of Excellence for Educational Research, Methodologies and Management. And we have some doctoral students, 12 of them responded to our questions regarding how do they experience studying or keeping up their study during the COVID-19 crisis and lockdown. And Professor Changat will report on that about that in more detail during his presentation. But the findings, of course, not representatives, from their 3 themes emerged that I would like to mention briefly, because they might be worthwhile to keep in mind during this session. Yes, firstly, we learned from our students that COVID-19 is threatening to raise levels of inequality between the students as they have returned to their home places with varying conditions concerning access to the internet, bandwidth and electricity, as well as family duties and general living conditions. Secondly, the experiences indicate that changing from mainly face-to-face teaching and learning to remote or online teaching and learning during COVID-19 has had an impact on the relationship between lecturers and supervisors on the one side and the students on the other side, as well as among the students. Whether and how traditional and often hierarchical relationships between junior and senior researchers in various contexts are reconfigured through more online-based teaching and learning will certainly be of interest in the time to come. The third and last theme that emerged was the great willingness by the students to embrace the new technologies and digital tools, as well as the positive attitude towards more online learning and interaction in future, hoping that lecturers and supervisors continue to develop their skills in online teaching and supervision beyond COVID-19. Yes, with this in mind, I would like to now introduce our presenters for today's webinar, starting with the first speaker, Professor Paul Webb. He's a Professor Emeritus of Nelson Mandela University and the former Director of the School for Educational Research and Engagement. His research interests are in developing scientific literacy and reasoning. He has been involved in education development projects in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East, and is currently working on 2 DAAD-funded German African Centers of Excellence projects. He's interested in the African Centers of Excellence projects. His interest there is now on postgraduate supervision and support via both conventional and digital processes. In his presentation, Paul will focus on how the fairly new digitalization initiative for the African Centers of Excellence, this is one of the projects that we are working in together, it's called Digitize, has evolved. In the 11 Centers of Excellence in Africa that are funded by the German Academic Exchange Service, DAAD, postgraduate education is a key concern, and the Digitize initiative aims to support the centers to digitalize their postgraduate programs, besides developing generic modules for all the centers. Since the initial project planning took place before COVID-19, Digitize is rather concerned with the pedagogies of online teaching and learning than on ad hoc solutions for remote teaching. However, COVID-19 has also affected the project in its initial phase. The next speaker is Professor John Changaj of Moi University, who has worked closely together with Paul Webb for the past 6 years in the East and South African German Center of Excellence for Educational Research, Methodologies and Management, called CERMISA, and lately also in the Digitalization Initiative, Digitize. Professor Changaj is the Dean of the School of Education of Moi University, with a student population of over 10,000 students on various campuses. In his presentation, John will focus on the efforts that his school has made to mitigate the negative effects of the COVID-19 crisis and the university lockdown on the situation of CERMISA doctoral students, as well as lecturers and other students, of course. He will also point out how his Center of Excellence and the School of Education have benefited from the Digitize initiative in terms of finding ad hoc solutions to developing digital literacy and technical infrastructure, and also by bringing in long-term questions of online pedagogy. Yes, the third speaker is Professor Helene Mariai, who is the head of Higher Studies Cell at the Mauritius Institute of Education. In that role, she coordinates 2 doctoral programs, which are run in partnership with the University of Brighton in the UK and the University of KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. Hence, she has had long-standing working relations with Professor Michael Samuel. Helene leads the team of 15 supervisors who support some 50 candidates on their doctoral journey. She's committed to the collaborative mode of learning and teaching, which translates in her community of practice approach to designing and implementing online postgraduate programs. She believes in the use of pedagogies which nurtures self-steering capacities of learners and teachers. In her presentation, Helene will focus on how digitalization of doctoral studies and the pedagogical reframing experienced during COVID times offer an opportunity for rethinking how partnerships may evolve in post-COVID times. Yes, the last speaker you've already met, Professor Michael Samuel, who brought us all together in this webinar, is the professor in the School of Education of the University of KwaZulu-Natal. He has served as a curriculum designer of innovative master's and collaborative doctoral cohort programs locally and internationally, and as a member of the Ministerial Committee on Teacher Education, assisting the development of national teacher education policy in South Africa. His research interests focus on higher education, teacher professional development, life history, and narrative inquiry. His current interests focus on designing and supporting postgraduate studies. Michael has facilitated numerous workshops for the CERMISA program, working with doctoral students, supervisors, and researchers, and infecting them with his research wheel that ultimately develops symptoms of research coherence, if I may put it this way. In his presentation, Michael will share his experience with teaching doctoral cohorts online and will focus on the question how the extensive use of technology in postgraduate education is affecting and changing higher education literacy, pedagogy, and the research agenda. Yes, with these remarks and introductory words, I would like to hand over to Paul our first speaker in this webinar. Paul, are you ready? Please unmute yourself. Do I have to do that?
I think I've done it myself, and I'm going to share my screen. And if you'll give me 1 second for it to allow me to, I'll get a slideshow from beginning. And so good afternoon to everyone. I'm very pleased to be invited here by Michael. And I'm going to talk to you about a digitalization project that's seen some very, very rapid evolution in the past 6 months since it was started. And as I say, it has been an evolutionary process rather than revolutionary. I'm going to use some biological examples or analogies when we go along. So please allow me that. I'm a biologist by trade. And the project that I'm going to speak about is called Digitize. Now, but what I'm going to focus on is a bit about the contestation between the technology itself and the people and the pedagogy. Because I think many of us will find ourselves in that position where the technology is great or the technology is not so great, and we tend to forget about the human issues. So firstly, what is Digitize? Digitize is a digital initiative for African Centers of Excellence. And these African Centers of Excellence are a DART initiative. They are German African relationships funded by the German federal government. In other words, the taxpayers' money. Now, they are about postgraduate education, and that's how it fits into this webinar. There are 11 centers of excellence across Africa. I'll show you where they are later on in this presentation. And in 2019, the German Academic Exchange Service, DART in Deutsch, DART in German, means the German Academic Exchange Service, they thought, should we start a new center of excellence in Africa, or should we do something overall as a digital initiative at all of the centers of excellence? So that was the decision to produce a digital initiative for all African centers of excellence, Digitize. It was a call for proposals. The German partners in the African Centers of Excellence were the only ones invited in the first place, and I think we might have some questions about that, but we'll leave that for another day. And so there was the conception of this digital initiative. That's my first biological analogy. So we got 2 sets of DNA. The first set was about programming a fancy digital platform in Germany. The other one was about people and online education in Africa. And so these 2 sets of DNA were put together in the conception of a proposal, which was accepted because we promised the world. And when it came to the budget, the usual thing happens. There was conflict. Now, I want to use another biological analogy of epigenesis. Now, epigenesis is something when the environment accelerates the genetic expression. In other words, we look at this proposal and what it is supposed to be. Like in our genes, we know that most of us are going to get old and gray. But some terrible occurrence can happen. You're bitten by a mamba, or your daughter goes off with somebody you don't want to, and your hair turns gray overnight. Now, your hair was going to go gray anyway. It's just that the environment switches on these genes a little bit quicker. And that's the analogy I'm trying to use for this project and the development of this project. And in the first instance, the arguments between the initiators of this project was the environmental factor. But the resultant expression was aimed at postgraduate teaching, at learning people and research at the centers. Naturally, I happened to fall on that side of the DNA, and I was very, very happy. So the first mutation was education and people first. Not everyone was very happy, much muttering. Everyone had their own ideas. And one of the problems or the issues was that the beneficiaries, the people at the African centers, were only allowed to say for the first time at a meeting that we had, a kickoff meeting. This meeting was held in March in South Africa, and there we all are. This was held at the Nelson Mandela University. You can see it was at the pre-COVID social distancing stage. Everyone's nice and snug, smiling for a photograph. And 60 delegates came from all over Africa and Germany. During those 3 days, 4 days actually, 3 days with the delegates, we had a qualitative evaluation. We wanted to know what the African centers thought of what had been produced. And those 3 major outcomes were, firstly, that there was some kind of orientation and understanding of what the project's about. People did not know exactly what the project was about. Everyone had their own ideas. And that's not only the delegates, it was also the people in the project, and quite frankly, the funders as well. Then the second thing was, it was pretty clear that people were quite excited, but they didn't know what to do. They needed some form of training in both the technical and the pedagogical aspects of digitalization. How do you do it? What can we do? We want to do it, we don't really know. And there was another outcome, which was that there was a great possibility of these centers of excellence to get together and talk. DART has a get-together once a year for the African Centers of Excellence, but we really got something going at this meeting because there was something concrete on hand. Right, so the first outcome was that there was orientation and better understanding for everybody. There we are, the usual way, sitting in a room, people talking, giving their perspectives. And there you see the man, Michael Samuel, who is an important part of this process. And all the delegates said by the end of the 3 days we were together, they had a much better understanding. But it also, as I said, became clear that there was a necessity for training on the technical and the pedagogical aspects. Because this project aims at getting the centers to be multipliers in their university eventually, but to be able to have at the centers the equipment. You can see padcasters there, the types of computers you need, the laptops with the extra software, etc., how to do things. And they had great fun. They really enjoyed it. Made movies for themselves, presentations, got them onto the computers, and found out how to do things. And as I said, they got together and they could really have their say about what they thought the project should be about. What was our second epigenetic mutation? Well, now the environment was the corona. No travel. We planned to travel to the centers. We planned to see them, to set them up. We'd bought equipment. Equipment sitting in Port Elizabeth. We had no way of delivering this apparatus to the participants. We didn't have our dedicated server. It was still sitting in China, right? Because we needed an African excellence dedicated server for us to use for online teaching and learning and research and a number of other things that the project aims at. So, noting face-to-face training and meetings, what did we do? Like everybody else, we had emergency remote teaching mode. Now, please remember, emergency remote teaching is not online teaching and learning. Online teaching and learning is a very deep and well thought out thing. Our emergency remote teaching is what can we do right now? We planned for it. It was in our DNA. We just didn't expect it to happen this quickly. I should imagine you're pretty familiar with that yourselves. The universities were plunged into this. I'm sure almost everybody who's listening now has had to get into some kind of emergency remote teaching. Some are fortunate enough to be real online educators, something different. So what we did was we opened a practice site on the Nelson Mandela University server, separate from the university, clear boundaries, can't interfere. Everyone got Zoom at the centers, all of these centers of excellence. And we piloted our first course and we thought, what is it now? Is it technical or is it about people? Well, the first thing we felt, we need to at least ensure that at each of our centers, we have a person or a team of people who can at least get onto Moodle and start producing online material. And we had a course which was run and all of the centers attended. And this course was, as people would need to do, to be able to start doing it at their own centers. But we didn't get to the pedagogy side, which is very important, but we've made our start, right? We've got all the hardware and the software waiting to be delivered. We've got Padcasters and iPads, etc. Our server's arriving. It's not here yet. It's going to be the Digiface server for African Centers of Excellence. It's been arriving in bits and pieces. And then we thought about this project is a Pan-African project. Not all Africans are exactly the same. We are not one bulk block. And as you can see from this picture, I'll put it up here because this is John and I working in West Africa with a group of delegates who half of them speak French and very little English. And so therefore we had the translators, as you can see in the box. We've had people wearing headphones, and we had a very good session for a week where we learnt in both languages. There wasn't a problem, except for the expense. So the language issues that there are overcome in our own project because the Digiface lead university is in Kiel, Germany. Now, not many people will have heard of Kiel, although they'll think it's Kiel, or I pronounce it Kiel, is up in northern Germany. This is in southern Germany, and they're right on the border of France. And luckily, most of the people at our lead institution can speak French. And therefore, we can work together with the West African countries who are Francophone. So we've done our activities that we've done them in groupings. We've got an East African group. John and Susan are the leaders of that group. We've got our Southern and West African groups, those that speak English. We've got our West African group, Francophone, and you can see where we operate. That's quite a nice chunk of Africa. Right? There's our Southern and West African group, and you can see our Francophone group goes very far. So what's the next mutation? Well, maybe it'd be a good thing. Maybe we can see things a little better if we mutate that way. And get to understand together and see that Digiface, this digital initiative, is not something that's rolled out, to quote Professor Michael Samuel. It's something that develops organically with input from all. But the question is, what's the next epigenetic factor that'll influence the process? What other crises are we going to have, or what other environmental pressures? And probably that will be the evolving needs of the participants in Africa. At least that's what I hope it is. And that'll influence how we work within the parameters of the project for the benefit of most of us. And we'll think, why didn't we think of doing this before? Thank you. I'm going to hand over now to Professor John Changosh from Moi University, the project leader for SAMISA.
Thank you, Paul, for the invitation, and I'm pleased to be part of this conference today. I am going to share my screen so that I can start my presentation. Just a minute. Just a minute. Okay, so I'm pleased to be invited here, and good afternoon to all of you. So I'm going to discuss about the CIMISA that we have heard about, and this is the East and Southern African German Center of Excellence in Educational Research Methodologies and Management. And in my next slide, I'm dealing here with the doctoral education in the COVID-19 times. This is very interesting times. Our partners are shown here, and our partners, you can see University of Oldenburg, you can see Nelson Mandela, University of Dar es Salaam, and Uganda Management Institute. These form CEMESA, which began in 2014 to 2013 to 2023. In my next slide, I'm going to discuss about COVID-19. The question is, will we manage online teaching and learning? What Paul is calling emergency online remote teaching? That is a very big question. This was immediately after the COVID-19. In the School of Education, where I'm the dean, we have about 200 postgraduate students. And before COVID-19, we used blended teaching, where we had 30%, which is through email and probably Musomi Moodle, but 70% was face-to-face. Most of our students are privately sponsored. We call them school-based or part-time mode of study. They come to the campus of the university during the school holidays, 3 times in a year. And we have also the semester students who are housed in the School of Education, and they are full-time. Therefore, you can see the need why we are pushing for long-term digital tools in postgraduate education, because our students are part-time. These ones from semester, they are full-time, and they have timelines to finish their studies. In the next slide, I'm going to discuss about, you can look at that particular gentleman there. He's getting concerned. The question is which way now? We were, before COVID-19, we were doing face-to-face 70%. Now, during the COVID-19, we can see that we are not fully online, but that is the journey towards that direction. We are still dealing with online remote teaching for emergency purposes. And I'm saying here that our combined efforts with Digitize and our partners will determine the way we are going. The next slide, the question is, what did we do as a school or semester? Because, and even more university at large. So we have the School of Education, we have CIMISA, and we also have the university at large. So what we did was to train both students and lecturers, as well as supervisors, to use online technologies. For example, Zoom, Kenneth, Skype, Musomi platform, which we have in the university, among many others that would help us in this emergency online remote teaching. Then the next slide is our activities. So the first activity here was teaching and learning. And in teaching and learning, our method was face-to-face 70%, online 30%. Now, during this time of COVID-19, it has to be 100%. So you can already see we were affected. So students and lecturers have been interacting through email group interactions, online platforms that are available, WhatsApp interactions. But I want to say thanks to Digitize again that Paul has already discussed about. They gave us a license for Zoom, and now we are using Zoom classes throughout our teaching in the school as well as the center. So that is on teaching. Of course, after teaching, exams come in. Again, we have been affected. We have not been able to do the examinations for those students who are due to do the examinations because our rules and regulations do not allow online exams. So we are awaiting an ad hoc committee of Senate that will give us a way forward next week on the suggestions on how to deal with the examinations. In my next slide, I'm talking about the field research. We have all our students in our partner institutions. They are unable to collect data. This is because of the lockdown. And as a result of that, they are not able to go to the field. And mostly our students would be carrying out their research in schools, which already have been closed. So we are trying to encourage our students as they await to go to the field, where the lecturers and the supervisors are interacting. They continue using available online platforms to try and improve the proposals that they are already done. The next thing that follows is student proposal writing, proposal defenses, thesis writing, thesis examination, and oral defenses. And then all this for our students, both in the center, in the School of Education, and also in the university, are affected. So what have we done? We have had individual interactions with our supervisors via online technologies that are available. And I agree with Paul that this is emergency online remote teaching. It is not really online teaching, and that's where we are going towards. And therefore, for the proposal defenses, the oral thesis defenses, we are again awaiting the ad hoc committee of Senate next week to give us the way forward. Otherwise, currently, our rules and regulations do not allow online defense of proposals and theses. The next thing that follows in this is this explanation, a very simple explanation, where we are coming from face-to-face teaching. We want to go to online teaching. We are not yet there. And you can see there is a connection between the face-to-face and online. And you can also see that we are very focused. We want to bridge that online teaching. And what are we doing? We are walking in that distance to reach there. And what are we doing? We are saying with the Digitize, with our partners, we are saying success is a journey and not a destination. As I continue, I also want to mention that Digitize collaboration, courtesy of this Digitize, though we are in the initial stages, we have managed to teach our students in the school. We have managed to teach the students in semester, and we are using whatever available means on online, especially Zoom, and we are just in the beginning. And we are thinking about the online pedagogies. We are happy that we have great partners from our partner institutions who are helping us to design courses, assessments, formats of meaningful online interaction with our doctoral students. So I'm very sure we shall reach that particular destination. What follows is we had another activity that was supposed to help us also enhance the collaboration and partnership to help our students and staff. This was an MOU between Moi University and UKZN, which we thought by May 2020 would have materialized. We made a visit early this year to UKZN. However, what is happening, negotiations are ongoing for us to sign the MOU, maybe through virtual. We hope it is going to work because we know this is going to help our students. Now let me deal with the responses by our current semester students. There are 12 of them. Those in Nelson Mandela University, those in Moi University, those at Uganda Management Institute in Kampala, Uganda, and those of the University of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. So the biggest challenge that were mentioned by our students, just as already mentioned by Malv, is that they say there are delays caused by the university administration not working digitally. For example, the research permits are not moving. The ethical clearances are not moving because offices are closed. Lack of solutions for online examination, which I have said we are awaiting Senate. Data generation interrupted or not possible during the shutdown of learning institutions, like schools where they were supposed to carry out their research. We also find that they also said there is poor internet connectivity and generally very limited access to internet in some areas. Challenges with electricity and bandwidth. Ineffective technology, online interactions would therefore be reduced to a minimum. There is also the problem of downloading of resources. They are saying this is a nightmare, while there is no meaningful interaction online that is possible. They also are talking about no access to scholarship funds in some cases, because again, things are not moving. As I continue about the responses from the students are also saying the exchange visits to partner universities and course supervisors have been canceled for this year. There are also delays, especially of the concern to the students, as neither their study leave nor their scholarship funding will be extended as per the regulations of the moment. Many students also say that they miss the day-to-day interaction with their classmates and the peer as they learn. The peer support is not there, and they are really struggling on their own. Remote teaching not always smooth. Assignments via WhatsApp messages are also often not very clear. As I continue on these challenges, they are saying working with the whole family at home is not easy. Taking care of the siblings, the children, they are also at home, and there is these issues of social distance. You cannot be assisted. Sources of motivation are also missing, and overcoming a mindset where students are overwhelmed by these thesis requirements. They are also saying all is not lost. There's positive outlook about it. The students feel comfortable using online tools and digitally literate. Online study itself is not perceived as problematic. Positive feedback concerning their online interaction with supervisors. Supervisors would be better accessible for students concerned in most cases. However, they also point out that the interactions changed from a broader kind of counseling into social life and matters of well-being to purely academic counseling, and that becomes a problem. We are also saying, all in all, efforts made by the lecturers, the supervisors, the coordinators, administrators of the programs, they make the best of the situation, where they have appreciated students, that the lectures are ongoing. And I want to appreciate Dr. Susan Kurgat at this particular point for the semester students and Malf, because they have put a lot of effort. And because of this, they perceive the use of digital tools as a great opportunity because the pace is faster. Towards, as I finish, experiences of lecturers, online classes. They said it was a challenge for the first time, but after training, they found it very appropriate, especially for small classes. Interaction levels were very high. Presentations were awesome, but they participated. And one of them said, I recommend future classes be held via Zoom with occasional face-to-face classes. One also said, my course objectives have been achieved. And therefore, most of them are saying online classes is the way to go. And as I finish, I want to finish and my summary using that particular picture, the story of face-to-face versus online teaching. Though it is not yet online teaching where we are, it is emergency online remote teaching. You can already see what is happening to face-to-face. If we can use this young man up there in that branch as face-to-face teaching, you can see they are being attacked from all over. They cannot survive. The only survival here is to accept, to move on and accept the use of online technologies, because that is the way to go, even after COVID-19. Thank you. So I'm going to welcome Professor Eileen Merihai to continue with her presentation.
Thank you, John. Hello, everybody. I'm really delighted to be in your midst this afternoon. In Mauritius, it's late afternoon here. So thank you, Michael, for inviting me. You know, when Michael asks a question, it's always almost rhetorical. He's already expecting between the two options. He knows already what the answer is. So thank you. I'm going to give a very crisp, what I'm hoping to be a very crisp presentation. I've never managed to speak for only 15 minutes. So Marvi, this is a personal challenge for me to just finish that in 15 minutes. So I've timed myself and I hope it's going to go as well as in the rehearsal. So give me just a second before for me to share my screen with you. So there it is. Am I sharing the screen? Have you stopped sharing, John?
Yes, I've stopped sharing.
Okay, so yes, I'm just going to put it on slideshow. Sorry for that. Yes, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about partnerships today, and the reason for me selecting to focus on partnership and doctoral education is because our provisions for doctoral education are occurring primarily through the development of partnership across institutions. So because I see there are a lot of participants who are not from the Mauritian context, I will give you in a moment some information about my context so that you can understand some of the points that I'm driving at during my presentation. So basically what I want to do for the next 15 minutes is to lead a discussion on the four aspects that are currently on my PowerPoint screen. So the first aspect I'm going to look at, and I'm going to do that very swiftly because I think the preceding presenters have touched upon a range of those aspects that I wanted to look at, but it will connect with also, I will try to connect it with whatever reflective pieces I want to engage you with. So in the first instance, I'm going to, from a programmatic point of view, because my position is that of a partnership management and a curriculum designer also for doctoral education. So I will start by very briefly zooming on the kind of curricular and pedagogical rescripting that we needed to engage in following the emergency remote teaching requirements that we were required to engage in. The second area of reflection is to perhaps get you connected with some of the ideas that we have been struggling with in terms of how we construct doctoral engagement and how the particular situation of the COVID pandemic provided us with an opportunity to rethink about doctoral engagement, both from the perspective of students and supervisors. The third line of reflection is going to relate to how the context of the partnerships occasion some of the specific changes that I would have indicated to you. And in the closing parts of my presentation, I'm going to talk to you about whether those initial adversities that we experience, whether they can be transferable in post-COVID times and whether they are more sustainable than our current practices. But more importantly, I want to lead a more ideological and philosophical reflection on what does it mean for sharing power between partners that are located in the North and in the South. So let me give you some background. The institution that I belong to is the Mauritius Institute of Education. And to continue with Paul's biological analogy of DNA, I can say that partnership has been in MIE's DNA ever since its inception. I mean, the institution was created as an international partnership endeavor. And ever since, our historical narrative has been characterized by some 70 partnerships that we have engaged in with countries from both the Southern and the Northern Hemisphere. However, two of those most enduring partnerships are the partnerships that we have had since 1998 with the University of Brighton in terms of master's level provision that were scaled up to doctoral level provision in 2011. Coincidentally, in the same year, we initiated another partnership with the University of KwaZulu-Natal to extend the provision for the Cohort Model of doctoral studies to the Mauritian campus. And I must say that in both cases, we have been going strong, despite some momentary adversities that I'm going to refer to in a moment. Now, this entire notion of partnership within the framework of Mauritian higher education landscape has to be understood and interpreted within the national policy of making Mauritius a regional knowledge hub. So this is the ambition that we have at the moment, and this ambition is transacted basically through the hope that the knowledge hub is going to emerge through a process of local higher education institutions partnering increasingly with international institutions of high repute. So we've mitigated success so far, and we have recently developed a huge campus on the west coast of the island, partnering with institutions from countries like France and so on, and Switzerland as well. Okay. So in terms of the doctoral provisions, we run two different programs. The University of Brighton proposes a professional doctorate in education, targeting professionals in education. And UKZN PhD is the more traditional Doctor of Philosophy program. Now, there are some similarities across both programs because both programs involve some form of online teaching and learning in terms of the supervisory framework that we have, which is a co-supervisory framework with one co-supervisor located on the MI campus and another, the main supervisor, located in the parent university. Now, both programs are run on a cohort model. The professional doctorate one is a slightly smaller cohort model of not more than 7, although exceptionally in 1 year we had 9. The UKZN program is a larger cohort of around 25. Now, both of these programs are delivered through intensive block teaching and learning sessions that are scheduled over a specific period of time, and they are face-to-face sessions. Now, as I said, there are some measure of distance learning already, which is technology mediated, that's already involved in the program. Now, how did the COVID pandemic alter the situation of doctoral studies? So at the time when the pandemic actually hit Mauritius, mid-March, at the higher study cell, we were gearing up for planning the delivery of intensive sessions for both programs that were about to come in a month's time. So immediately, the question was whether we would postpone it or whether we would shift to emergency remote teaching. Now, obviously, as you are already aware, universities had their backs to the wall. And I think that the motto at the time was that we should ensure some continuity at whatever the cost in terms of the logistics and the technicalities of it. So as all of you in that situation, we developed work from home policy, but that meant substantial readjustment in terms of the engagement of tutors and the engagement of doctoral candidates as well. As John said, obviously, one cohort on the EdD was gearing up for ethical clearance to access the field. And the cohort 3 of UKZN program had already negotiated ethical access, had already started data production, and then they were stopped in their progress because of that sudden confinement. So at the institution and together with our partners, we had a long discussion as to how feasible this remote teaching was. There was a lot of hope because we had been preparing and thinking very seriously of integrating increasingly some form of remote teaching and online learning in our courses. So it did take us by surprise because we were contemplating it as a choice when overnight it became a necessity. So you can imagine the kind of anxieties that it generates, and I'm sure you are familiar with all the issues and questions around this. We were also concerned that if we waited for normality to resume, there may never be a resumption of normality. So this constituted, in fact, an exceptional circumstance that actually pushed us to think in a kind of an accelerated form of how our academic and professional life could be pushed to be reconfigured in a particular way in the near future. So how did we rescript in terms of curriculum the doctoral provision? Obviously, at level 1 was the level of technicality. So because we were synchronizing across 3 institutions, we needed to make sure that the level of technical preparedness and readiness was similar in all those contexts to be able to transfer the learning even into remote teaching mode. So we had a head start compared to other institutions because our Center for Open and Distance Learning was headed by one of the participants, Avinash here, 2 years ago already shifted our platform on Teams. So that was a lot of foresight on the part of the institution, which meant that the technical logistics that we needed was already accessible by both students and supervisors as well. The resourcing also, we were starting to construct a resource, and we had already started thinking about moving completely online with our postgraduate diploma in education, which meant that we had initiated very embryonically a team of lecturers at the MIE on digital online pedagogies, digital pedagogies. So we had a kind of a foundation of a dialogue that had already been established, but we were very much aware that the situation that we were facing was not the situation that we had ideally hoped for. But it gave us a lot of comfort, and it gave us some measure of confidence to also think that it is possible to do some of this even at very short notice. In terms of policies, I think there was quite a bit of harmonization across UKZN, University of Brighton and MIE to allow us to develop, to redesign the curriculum to afford more spaces for remote teaching and learning. But what was more profoundly unsettling for us as tutors was to really negotiate in terms of the pedagogical postures that we would need to be taking in an online learning environment, a remote teaching environment. So the key determining dimension was to maintain the academic quality and integrity of our programs, even if they were being delivered in remote teaching and learning environments. And because doctoral education has a specific requirements in terms of generating the process of thinking, discussing, writing, debating, that's really inscribed in the specificity of doctoral pedagogy, we had to be extremely careful in terms of deciding the kind of pedagogical setup that we will be able to transfer in a remote teaching environment, especially in terms of the communicative practices that we would like to develop, and also in terms of the quality and the variety of learning spaces that we could create in a remote teaching environment. So many of us were already conversant with using Moodle, but as you know, Moodle is a repository, rather has been used by us as a repository rather than an interactive platform for teaching and learning. So there was that important shift that needed also to be made. So in the process of rethinking how we could convert this pedagogy, doctoral pedagogy, in an online learning form, in a remote teaching learning form, I'm sorry if I'm using it interchangeably, Paul, I know it's not the same thing, you mentioned that, but for us, we're learning the difference as we go along. So the first issue that was raised was how are power hierarchies to be negotiated within that learning space. How we would ensure that there was adequate student voice in a remote teaching. How would the competencies and functionalities of each of the contributing tutors be optimized? How would their anxieties be addressed? Because we all had different level of readiness to engage in that kind of learning environment. Obviously, we saw possibilities as well, not only constraints. We thought that even in a remote teaching environment, there might be a possibility to accommodate an increasing range of worldviews and pedagogical perspective. So how would that diversity be then accommodated within that learning environment? And how would all of these be used to be leveraged to activate doctoralness in ways of thinking? So this is how we organized our thinking when we thought of doctoral education. I'm doing that post event. So doctoral education is about doing, so that implies how are the functionalities of doctoral learning to be integrated in our doctoral pedagogy, reading, writing, and designing. How are doctoral beings to be factored in the remote teaching and learning environment? And that included allowing for different paradigmatic positioning, allowing different relationships to develop and evolve, and defining a joint purpose. And of course, the question of becoming a doctoral, a scholar, related to how would we create a space to address the ethical and intellectual qualities and dispositions and habits that we wanted to create. Can remote teaching offer us an opportunity to develop that as well? Marvi, how am I doing for time?
Just one more minute, Haylene, please.
I'm just going to try and close this very quickly. So I'm just giving you access to the kind of questions and thinking that we had in terms of redesigning doctoral learning. But at the back of our mind, in terms of management of the partnership as well, we have had very similar experiences with both partners. And we do realize that very often when you come from a small island developing state, the mental position that you are in, because you are a small institution compared to the huge institutions, population and practices that your two partners are bringing to the table, there's always that idea that you share remoteness and isolation and vulnerabilities. But what we found in the experience of the COVID is that in fact we might have had a head start on the bigger institutions, because our level of preparedness to manage the partnership, to manage the situation, both at a national and at an institutional and pedagogical level, were quite high actually, because of all the antecedents that I have just referred to. So there was good foundational work. There were good practices of team planning within the institutions that were nurtured through the partnership. So the experience of learning was really that we could harness that shared narrative of collaboration to address the challenges that came to us in a very unexpected manner. So what we did in a small period of time is that we scaled up lower level provision within a small intra-institutional space to doctoral learning in an inter-institutional space, where we also experience a great measure of collaborative leadership, which we think is something we need to take forward. And my last slide is really getting in the question of how can we harness the twin agendas of academic revitalization and partnership renewal? How can we bring the learning in terms of the programmatic revitalization of doctoral learning and allow this to rejuvenate also partnership in a more equitable manner? So I'm going to stop here because maybe I'll take some questions later on. And just to say that in a world of ambiguities and uncertainties, we have moved away from a folklore of tacitness in pedagogy. There's more explicitness, there's more open communication, and that is a wonderful space which we hope will be sustainably explored in the future. Thank you. So I'm moving on now to a last presenter who's going to try and synthetically bring this all together. Michael, over to you. Thank you.
You'll have to stop sharing your screen, Heidi.
Yes, Michael, just pause share. Okay.
Good afternoon, all. And thank you very much for joining us in this particular presentation. I'm just going to start with announcing the title of my presentation is on access, climatization, and attitude. And this takes on a more theoretical exploration of where we are with respect to our present times of negotiating postgraduate education. I'm specifically going to talk on two programs, and the one is not a PhD, but a postgraduate diploma in higher education studies, and you'll see why it's the agenda of my discussion as I go forward. I'm going to be looking at a second program, which is run by the Higher Education Learning and Teaching Association of South Africa, in conjunction with the sponsors of the Department of Higher Education, of launching a PhD program. And in this discussion, I'm going to be drawing on how the agenda of capacity development of staff in universities has become a priority. So the PG DIP program was focusing on early career academics, and I'm going to be talking about my reflections of a module that was delivered just before the closure of the lockdown period in the beginning of March, and then we had to reformulate during the course of the module presentation in order to move to a new modality. And so in a sense, I have experience of both pre and post lockdown modalities in that discussion. The participants in this particular context was largely students who were lecturers at rural universities, public universities, and private universities throughout the country of South Africa. And I'm going to be looking at them, interestingly, coming from a range of disciplines, a range of portfolios, and also themselves engaging with undergraduate and postgraduate teaching. The second program is a program looking at doctoral education, trying to understand academic development. Where and how did we understand this construct called academic development? Where did it come from? How did it evolve? And in particular, this program was focusing on the notion of social inclusion, a social justice agenda, in the process of questioning how academic development as a discourse has entered into higher education. And these were students who were selected onto a program to research these kinds of questions. Why are we looking at academic development? Who offers it? Who accepts it? Who receives it? Who should be developed? Is it staff, students, institutions, the systems? What is this process of activating the development of lecturers? You can see this agenda that is in both these programs is to question the notion of the capacity development of the lecturing staff rather than only focusing on the capacity development of the students.
Michael?
So one of the questions that came through very strongly was the question about what do we mean by academic literacy? The literacy to produce, as Hylene was suggesting, the kind of pedagogic prospects, the idea of what is the notion of what it means to be a teacher, a lecturer, an academic, a researcher in the postgraduate sector. And so
Michael, can I quickly interrupt you, please?
Yes.
You started your slideshow because we only see your cover page, your first slide.
Okay, I'm going to have to end my
from beginning. You just click on from beginning, maybe, because
okay.
It's not.
Sorry, one moment. I'll be 1 minute. Sorry about that.
Yeah, it needs to be on slideshow mode. Yes, that's better. Thank you.
Is it on slideshow? Can you see me now? So basically, I've been looking at these two particular kinds of programs, and I'm drawing a distinction between the way in which we might have a look at moving the discourse away from technical issues to more conceptual issues, rather moving the discussions away from purely operational issues to conceptual issues about the pedagogy and the notion of what we mean by doctoral and postgraduate education. So these three constructs of accessibility, acclimatization, and attitude are what I want to focus on. I'm going to try from this current slide, and let's see, can you see me? Can you see my slide now, Malva?
Yes, we can, but it's not in presentation mode. We can also
okay.
see
so I'm going to go back to this mode. Is that okay?
Michael, when you share it, you share the application.
I'm sharing my PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah, because if you start the presentation and only then share, then it will show it in the running mode. Otherwise, it shows the design mode as a separate application.
Okay,
So
so
stop the share, then show it, and then start the presentation, and then you share it.
But this is also okay. I mean, we can read it, isn't it?
I'll continue with this way. That's fine. I'm sure you'll see. You'll have to concentrate with me, unfortunately, on the ways in which I'm going to be doing the presentation. All right. I would have preferred the other ways to roll it out, but that's okay. We're all learning the technology, the technical issues. Thanks, Johan. All right. So I think in the issue of the ways in which we've been focusing on doctoral or postgraduate education, or the post-COVID period, or the online lockdown period, has to be preoccupied by modes of delivery, data connectivities, access to material, and focusing strongly on the kind of systemic fault lines and the difficulties that we have within the present current systems of the South African context in particular, but we've heard how this also plays itself out in global context. I'm going to be arguing that a lot of the preoccupation is about completion of the course calendar, about assessment, about performance, about management of the processes, and whether students are going to master the content that we deliver to them. But I think the emphasis is not sufficiently being placed on what kind of knowledge are we actually sharing with the students, or engaging with the process of constructing with the students. There's a hidden assumption that the knowledge project itself is a transference of certain received bodies of knowledge that get translated from one form into a digital form. And therefore, if we move into the digital mode of engaging, that therefore we are somehow improving the quality of our pedagogy. I believe that we are not actually sufficiently paying attention to the nature of the knowledge itself that we are engaging with. What kind of knowledge project are we engaging with? So therefore, I want to say that postgraduate education forces us to think about knowledge making, knowledge constructions, questioning the rituals and the routines of the higher education system itself, beginning to ask questions about why do staff feel vulnerable when you shift to technology? What makes them feel vulnerable? Not the technical vulnerability, but what are they feeling exposed to when they have to move in these new modes of operation? Now, what I'm surprised by in running these particular courses, that students, and these are largely all lecturers at universities that I'm working with, are very easily able to symbolically and rhetorically talk about social justice agendas and new visions and new missions for their institution, but in fact are operating with extremely conservative, what I'm calling deficit pedagogies. And I'm arguing that the key construct of accessibility is not access to the technology, it's accessibility to the pedagogical project and epistemological accessibility. And I think that is where our discourses need to be shifting towards theorizing the nature of our epistemology and our epistemological project. So acclimatization for me is not about orientation on how to use Zoom or the discomfort or nervousness of students to be engaging. Yes, those are technical platform baseline issues, but are we pushing the agenda to question how are we mediating learning? How are we mediating the quality of knowledge projects? So for example, in the initial phases of the engagement with the students were obsessed with the issue of, is my email address working? I want to be contacted by my personal email. So all of these particular agendas were seemingly suggesting that students too were pushing lecturers towards understanding that the role of the teacher, lecturer, is to deliver pedagogy at the convenience of the student. What does this do? In my opinion, doesn't make the learner an active participant in their pedagogy. What it does, it reinforces a passive recipient mode for the learner student, even in postgraduate education. And I think that is fundamentally a problem about how technology might be reinforcing our old patterns of pedagogy, which is not allowing us to move into new spaces. The second issue regarding accessibility, I became more and more aware that students define quite clearly a distinction of how they work at work and how they work at home using technology. And I think this is very interesting because we might be engaging with an examination of what might be referred to as technological literacy practices. Who is allowed to use computers when, how often, etc. in the home space as opposed to the office space? Now you would recall I was describing that my students originally were in the office doing the online pedagogy, and then suddenly had to switch to a home-based pedagogy. And all sorts of new literacy practices started to emerge as we moved into the home space. In fact, there was a questioning about how much of the public space should enter our private spaces of the home. And that was an early negotiation that I had to acclimatize students to, that I was not really looking to see what their curtaining looked like or what their wall paint looked like or what their home environment looked like. I was interested in the nature of what were they learning from the interaction. But the practice was about the nervousness of the physicality of delivery, the physicality of space, rather than the interactivity of space. The next issue that I would like to say that the green bar that you see of green issues tended to be focusing on these operational issues. But as we acclimatized more and more, students shifted towards reorienting to be able to start talking about pedagogical issues. And the pedagogical issues were issues like asking questions about what does preparation for, pre-course engagement, before you engage with an online pedagogy? What kind of pedagogical responsibility and engagement needed to happen before you entered the space of an online class? Now, we know that the flipped classroom is an old concept. They knew about it theoretically, but when it meant, what it meant to operationalize this in their own learning spaces as postgraduate education students, this was needing to be rethought. So the engagement of workshops, poster making sessions, assignment negotiations, all became negotiated into the pedagogical space in the process. So it's not just a delivery mode of lectures, but the modes began to be recreated of looking at artistic modes. We ended up using music, we ended up using visuals, we ended up using auditory tracks in order to activate the medium, the message, the mode of learning needed to shift. I want to shift then now to my favorite person at the moment is Yuval Noah Harari, who is pushing us to rethink philosophically our historical juncture. So he's a historian and a philosopher who, if you haven't read his books, I recommend that you read it immediately. You'll start with one and go through all three of them, one after the other. But let's listen to what Yuval had to actually say to us. He says, we need to change our attitude as higher education lecturers. And he's not talking about attitude with, you know, your personal disposition. He's talking about our theoretical disposition, about what it means to be in the higher education system. And he's arguing we are going to be very soon and quickly sideswept by the power of the interrelationship between artificial intelligence and biotechnology. He says we are rapidly moving into a new era where computers will know us humans better than we know ourselves. And therefore, it would be able to algorithmically predict strategies for the future. It's already being seen in the way in which the search for a new virus, for example, to the pandemic, a cure to the pandemic, is being used algorithmically rather than only through experimental research. So what he is suggesting is that we are going to be seeing in the knowledge-making enterprise an increasingly explosion of what he's calling multiple revolutions, explosions of the temporality of knowledge, where knowledge that we know is already becoming outdated even as we speak. It's constantly being updated. So he says that the new normal will not be about living with certainties and predictabilities, but dealing with uncertainties. And he goes back to look at how in major historical revolutions, such as the agricultural revolution or in the industrial revolution, how people, systems, projects, countries, nationhoods had to completely reinvent themselves. And if they did strategically align themselves, they were able to exercise important, powerful ways of engaging with expansion of their worldviews. In fact, that's how colonialism was born post-industrial revolution. And so he's arguing the technological revolution allows us to be able to remind all of us that increasingly many of the jobs that we know, many of the research questions that we already are engaging with are soon to become irrelevant. There will equally be occupations that become irrelevant. For example, the first profession that he suggests that will go would be doctors, because AI, artificial intelligence, will be able to predict the kind of biotechnology. So are lectures too going to become obsolete? In this agenda, Noval Harari is also arguing that the relationship between the parliament, the marketplace, and universities will constantly be reconfigured. And therefore, we will no longer be dealing with issues of nationalism or xenophobia or parochial regional operation, but instead we should be looking at a global pandemic. So he's arguing that there's
Michael, so yes. I don't feel bad stopping Helene, but not stopping you. So just that you know your time is up. Okay.
It's the last slide. And so these particular uncertainties will certainly be the new agenda. So here's my last slide. If we talk about accessibility, technology is not the solution. Teachers and their worldviews about pedagogy are going to be the future. Technology is merely an opportunity. Acclimatization, let's not focus on the operational issues. Let's shift our discourse to conceptual issues. And how are we preparing ourselves for the multiple recurring revolutions that the new era will bring about? Thank you. I'm sorry for running over time.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks for shortening up your presentation, but it's very interesting. And I think, yes, thank you to all of you for your interesting and very rich presentations. We got a lot of very appreciative and positive feedback. People can identify with what you're saying from their own experiences. And also, yes, there are a number of questions, of course, that came up during the presentations, and Yes, maybe Johan can try first or state a first round of questions, set of questions that geared towards understanding and trying to maybe make sense of the first part of the presentations, where a lot of talk was given about partnerships and the collaboration part of getting this whole thing started now online. Helene was talking about maybe we have a chance to get equitable partnerships now, since universities in the South might, or in developing countries might be as skilled as and prepared, or even more prepared. That's what we experience than universities in the North, and so on. And also the difficulties and conflict that Paul was talking about in the Digitize project. So maybe, Johan, do you have some?
Yeah. So, yes, I'll start with the first question that was posed there. What principles will inform the organic development of the project? And it was kind of aimed at Paul, so.
Thank you, Johan. Can I share my screen? I think I can.
Yes.
I will get something in a moment. Thank you, Rita. I think that was a very important question. And it's about negotiation. When I talk about negotiation, I talk about thinking about listening to one another, to respecting one another, and to actually having true equality. And we can do this not only in the parameters of, say, our centers of excellence and people we're working with. This means working with all of our students as well. And I can't go into any depth now, but to make a bit of an advertisement here, we have an article which Marva will be able to direct you to. It's something we wrestled with in SAMISA, in the early years of SAMISA, because sometimes there are lessons that are learned very bitterly, and sometimes there are lessons that are learned very satisfactorily. And we've learned satisfactorily in SAMISA. So we have a paper, African-German Cooperation Towards Decolonizing Higher Education, SAMISA Approaches and Lessons Learned. That is in this journal, ZEP, German one, but in English. And we learned most about how we dealt with each other as Africans and Germans, and where the power was coming from. So I hope that's answered the question to a degree.
Yes, thanks, Paul. Yes, a strong concern or question here that I found also is that what have we actually learned from the 2 to 3 months now lockdown and being thrown into this situation of having to go into emergency remote teaching, but also to be thinking about pedagogy and the issues that you raised, Michael, about accessibility and more theoretical approach to thinking about the pedagogy or the interaction, the communication, or the culture of interaction that you raised, Helene. Yes, what have we actually learned? Where must we put our energy now, and where are we in another 3 months' time, maybe? Helene, would you like, or Michael would like to respond to that first? Yes.
Yeah, I think that the energies are being directed into baseline issues, which I'm acknowledging need to happen: orientation, accessibility, technicalities. But if we believe that that's where we have to stop, then I think we miss the project of the possibility of reimagining the way in which postgraduate education should be engaged. And I think that's what I think the agenda needs to shift away from the operational issues to really reimagining higher education. What is higher education for? It's not a certification agency, higher education. It's about a knowledge-making enterprise. And we need to not become complicit with an agenda of just ritualizing our past practices. We've learned that there's an opportunity to reinvent ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
I think Eileen might share my view there.
Yeah.
I think the coming from the experience that we have had for the past few months, I think the institution where I'm working, we had already made a significant shift towards discussing the second level post-operational issues. Because a few months back, I think since last year, we had engaged in developing small communities of practice and inquiry, focusing around our own teaching and our own pedagogies. And that was in preparation for moving in an online learning environment. So I'm saying how I see that evolving. I think we don't really have a choice, because this is, if we look at the direction in which higher education is evolving around the world, that push towards democratization for online learning and the changing nature and profile of students on campus now has already exerted quite a bit of pressure for institutions to be thinking strategically about this move. But what I think institutions have not factored in powerfully enough was what kind of paradigmatic pedagogical shift that would imply. So many institutions have put all their resources thinking that the technology is going to get us there, but they have really not thought about the pedagogical and the human factor, because there's substantial faculty anxiety about moving to remote forms of learning. And if we don't learn to make people comfortable in a space where they can talk about how they teach and why they teach in that particular way and what learning outcomes they are getting, we are not going to get there. It's going to just be a reproduction of all the failures of the face-to-face teaching that we know very well of. Yeah.
Yes, so it resonates well with what Michael is saying, that we need to reinvent ourselves, and also Dr. Kefa was writing in the chat that we need to think about the apprenticeship model in the master's study program carrying on in the doctoral education, and that's a very dominant model in many universities, that it's not about knowledge production, it's more continuing what you did in your master's. But they were asking, how can we make lecturers aware that this shift is now, that we need this shift to take place now. And the other aspect was mentioned that I found interesting was emotive social interaction, the emotive aspect of meeting people face to face. Don't we need that any longer? Is Zoom enough? Can we interact on Moodle and share our ideas the same like face to face? So maybe your statement, John, maybe you would like to say something about that.
Thank you, Chair. What we have learned in the last 3 months is that we have to invest on online pedagogies. I want to say that our traditional methods may not sustain us going forward. The reason is, I can give an example of doctoral students still sitting examination, that they must sit in to do an exam. Is there a way we can get out of that, so that our students can maybe do assignments, take away cards, and we award them? Just like what Michael said, that it is not a certification institution. Once we know that the student has acquired the techniques they have, then that is good for us. So that is something I'm learning. And then secondly is that with our partners now, with our collaborations that we have, with the experience we learned from our colleagues, I think definitely, like I had said, ours is 30% online and 70% face-to-face. So you can see with what is coming, definitely we are going to change the other way around. 70% online, maybe 30% face-to-face.
Mm-hmm. Michael first and then Johan.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that cohort models have become a feature of all the programs of all the participants in recent times. So John in Moy University, the Nelson Mandela University, MIE have all already shifted away from this master apprenticeship, top-down delivery of models of doctoral education. All of us already experimented with shifting the boundaries of power away from purely located in a cloning model of the supervisor in towards a much more interactive model. I think digital pedagogies allow us now to move into these kinds of spaces to recreate. How do we develop this communities of practice or cohorts? And that's possible because the various chat rooms, WhatsApp, social media, all of these things are all possibilities to assist individuals to recreate that kind of collegiality and interactivity across borders, across institutions. And I think that is something that we must, when we talk about decolonizing, it's not about the North versus the South, it's about decolonizing our attitude.
Okay, thanks. Just a question, because one of our students was asking, how, if I start my PhD now and it's purely online and I never meet my colleagues in an international study program, how would that feel? Is that really the same? Can we really make up for that? But I don't know, maybe you don't want to respond to that now. It is difficult to say. People coming to a new city or whatever, starting somewhere and or sitting at home and doing their PhD. It is a challenge, I would say, but yes. But Johan, you wanted to either ask a question?
Yes, well, I actually just wanted to add on to the emotive aspects discussion, because one of the things that's, even though, like Michael just mentioned, you do get this move towards establishing cohorts. One thing that is really important is to understand that you cannot, a cohort will not establish itself, or will very rarely establish itself. You have to foster it. So if you have a group of PhD or even master students who's working on a topic that is overlapping or in the same area of research, if you as the supervisor were to facilitate smaller sessions, similar to this, webinars or even research colloquiums to connect them, you can to a certain extent allow the students to have the same feeling of connectiveness that they would get in a physical environment. Because that is what most students in online studies often report as the primary obstacle, is the feeling of isolation when you study online. You don't have classmates you relate to. And for, I think, at a doctoral level especially, it should be fairly easy because it's much smaller groupings. Obviously, if you have only a single doctoral student, you will have to look at larger research groupings you can maybe do with 2 or 3 supervisors who can collaborate. But that is, the tools are there, but the tools will not automatically make it happen. You still have to, as a human, intervene and maybe schedule people and prod them in the beginning to participate a bit.
Yes, thank you. That's again about pedagogy, huh? That's why we need to really think about that carefully. Yes. Well, what did I? Do you have other questions, Johan, from the?
Yeah, there's quite a lot of questions.
Yeah.
So maybe a very, very generic one. What's the motivation to digitize doctoral education? What's the primary motivation here? Obviously, COVID is a current motivator, but this process started before COVID-19 happened. So if maybe you could just tell us a little bit about the background towards what led up to this.
Paul, maybe you can say something about the Digiphase, why thinking about digitalization at all? What is the benefit?
Well, firstly, one is logistical. In many of the places in our centers, the African German centers are situated, such as Mali. or Senegal. Students are very, very remote. There is one motivation is to be able to have better contact. And that better contact is what people are bringing up in the questions as well. Where's the data coming from? I don't have contact. We had something at our university, fees must fall, and we ended up moving the entire university examinations into the soccer stadium, the 2010 soccer stadium. And we set up areas of access to the internet at libraries and other such areas in the townships and around town. It worked in the short term. So one of the motivations is, yes, logistics. And those logistics are what we got to overcome as well. Although I'm thoroughly agreeing and enjoying all the aspects of the pedagogy and the human relationships, because they are the most important. But there's certain, one motivation is logistical. There are many others we can mention, but I'll leave that to other people.
Yes, and yes, Michael, maybe you want to add to that?
Yeah, another issue is simply from a resource point of view and about asynchronous learning. I think, Johan, you know this more than all of us do, is the advantage of people being able to learn at their own pace, in their own context, in their own situation, and that the classroom space is not a space for delivery. A classroom space is a place for interactivity. And I think that's exactly was one of the motivations, is that you had the belief that the resources were available, but they were being located if only you had physical access to enter into that particular space. Whereas I think the digital format allows individuals to have access to the YouTube video or to the digital material that is designed, or the video material that they had to learn it for themselves. But what I found personally in the delivery of this model, that we've just had 1 or 2 months of engaging with this particular model, is that students, because they have a history of passivity in the learning process, that they have to be prodded, as you suggested there. They have to be encouraged to say, you've got to watch this video, because I'm not going to be dealing with the content of that video. I'm going to deal with your questions related to the content. And I think what this does, it shifts the responsibility of learning to be a co-constructive agenda. And I think that is extremely useful for doctoral education, particularly. Teaching individuals that agency comes from taking ownership of the learning process, rather than simply a recipient of some directive or a kind of perspective that you ought to follow what your supervisor said. If I may comment also on a question that emerges on another level, is accessibility to the field. We have this kind of empirical notion that unless I touch, feel the site, then only I will know it. Whereas empirical ways of engaging might be, I could engage with the field by an interview, by a video taken in the school context. So what's basically also emerging in research methodologies is the concept of netography. So using the net and using the internet to be able to find information and harvest information in a different way. So I think what's emerging is we have to shift our conception that field work only means I have to be in this physical space and the presence of the individual. So I think this just allows people much more latitude and freedom and creativity. So I'm interested by the agenda of creativity that it brings about.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Helene.
I just have a kind of a reflection. It's very personal and very emergent at the moment. It's very experiential for in terms of what I'm living with my own students. I'm getting to think whether the face-to-face human interactivity occurring in a face-to-face mode is not, and I know I'm going to have a lot of people opposing that. It's not overrated in many ways when I look at my own classroom interactions and the quality of interactions I'm having with individual students in an online form. So for example, yesterday evening, I managed to get my hands on a student that had disappeared for the past 4 months and reappeared for a team session. So I got to meet him and talk to him, meet his family as well, and his daughter. So the quality of our interaction online was much superior to the quality of the interaction that we had when we came on campus, because he was always worried about getting home and I was always between 2 meetings and talking to him. So I'm just wondering, I don't have a kind of a finite decisive view, but I just want to share that I'm enjoying the kind of opportunities that online interaction is offering with the students and the kind of relaxed mode that we can have a more balanced conversation, a conversation where my students are willing to talk more because they're in a space at home and they're quite relaxed as well. But it has implication in terms of work-life balance for us also as lecturers. You know, there are all those issues around, you know, is it okay for me to have set up a Skype session at, I don't know, 8 o'clock, you know, where's my family time? So there are a range of issues, but it's just sharing with you where I am at the moment and just to see how I'm discovering new forms of human interactivity in a remote teaching setting. Because at the beginning, I was an ardent defendant of face-to-face. So I was in that group of people who said, nothing is going to replace face-to-face. You know, they'll have to walk over my dead body, literally.
Okay, thanks for that view. Johan, you have...
Yeah, actually, Eileen, can I pose a question then that was posted on the forum that I think ties in quite well with what you just said now? What is your view now? Because obviously your drive online was very much currently COVID-19 has influenced your decision-making strongly there in a post-COVID world. So what do you see your new mode of interaction is going to be, the mix between online and face-to-face, and how did this change your
I think our thinking started pre-COVID time because, as I said, we were working on the PG debt provision and shifting online. So there was a lot of group thinking. So we are very tight, close-knit community of lecturers with different perspectives on online learning. Some are very pro, some are very against, but we were thrown in that kind of a team where we had to discuss this. I think for me personally, post-COVID, there's going to be a lot of carry forward in terms of the learning for me. And I think it's not about remote or technology mediated or face-to-face environment. For me, it really triggers down to the fundamental question of what does good teaching and good learning means? What does it mean to give autonomy and capacity to the students and developing those intellectual habits and dispositions? So I'm very much seeing this as the driving question, rather looking at the environment and the technology as the driving question. If that can be achieved better through technology mediated, so be it. So for me, that's just a means. There's a lot of clarity as to what my end and my purpose is, epistemologically and otherwise. Because talking about that student again, he couldn't have access to me in a face-to-face environment. So he had access to me in an online environment. So for him, for me, it was important meeting him at that point. That was also a social justice orientation, that it's important for me to allow students to access me, whether they want it in a face-to-face mode or in an online mode. So it's all about a lot of that kind of flexibility as well. Yeah, I don't know if I answered your question.
Okay, Micah?
I think Hailene and I will report on teaching the PhD program. We've always pushed the idea of needing to be attending the seminars on a Friday evening, and our programs run on a weekend program, etc. And we would constantly be debating with students, arrive on time, make sure you participate for the whole session, etc. And in the face-to-face delivery. What we found in the online delivery of the PhD program, we had almost 99% full attendance on time, arriving for the module because it was starting and it was going ahead. And so we didn't have any of those kinds of issues. The 1% was one student, will probably be less than 1%, but was the person who was afraid of security issues because he was afraid of Zubinas, the idea of people hacking into his account. And so you can see that that's the only experience we've had so far. But from a pedagogical point of view, we've had full attendance, near full attendance of all students and all supervisors. And by the way, both in South Africa and in Mauritius, simultaneously joining together on that cohort program, whereas previously it was restricted to the facilitators who were actually engaging in the face-to-face pedagogy. And we had to come back to mediate all of the discussions and the debates of that particular seminar. Whereas now it was happening in real time. Supervisor could actually watch and see all the kind of questions and the responses that could be engaged with. So from anything, I'm becoming a convert. From that point of view, I think most of you will know that I would love to be able to stand and talk and engage with individuals, but certainly this allows me also just simply, I'm not available to be able to run 20 workshops one after the other. I'll be exhausted. Now you can videotape me and you can watch me teach that section. So there we go. Yeah.
There we go, as a solution. Okay. Yes, but I wonder, because our students, they raised the issue of inequality, and I'm still worried that you don't seem to have problems with students not being able to access the internet, especially now in COVID-19 times where they can't stay on campus, where there might be better internet availability and so on. And yeah, our students raised that, and I also think it could be different forms of aspects that shape our inequality debate now through this, even though access might be easier in some parts, access even to the supervisors and talking to the lecturers, but in other areas it might be problematic as well, I think, to be mainly online. And actually I would fear to have people doing a PhD just in front of their computers, like the computing science people that we call nerds also. I think that's nothing really for education, but maybe that's for another time. Before Michael says his votes of thanks and closing remarks, can I have one statement by each of you, a take-home message that you would like to tell our participants for this afternoon's webinar that they must keep in mind, or that they should think about? That would be nice. Paul, can you start?
Sure thing. Firstly, the key message is that online teaching and learning is not emergency remote teaching. It's not about you. It's about your audience, your students, or whoever it is who are doing the learning. And then therefore you need to be accomplished pedagogically, technologically, and in media if you are going to get the results that you want.
Thank you very much, Paul. That was on the spot. John, could you say your take?
Yes, might take just a minute. Might take in just a minute. I will have to say something here in a minute. I hope I'll get it. Wow, I hope I'm getting it. disappeared. Okay, so I want to say that something I wanted to share. I'm not getting it, but maybe the next person can do it as I pick something. Just one slide.
Okay, Helene, would you carry on?
Yeah, I just have a very short.
You have muted yourself. Sorry, can you unmute yourself? You're muted.
I have a very short kind of philosophical take on this. I think in any situation, it gets as good and as bad as you want it to be. I mean, there are constraints and conditions, but the kind of dispositions with which we enter a particular educational challenge determines, to my view, to a large extent, what the outcomes are. So there's a lot of self-authorship that's possible, whether you're a student, whether you're a lecturer. But I think the question is also about how institutions are going to deal with that and how we are going to allow these issues to emerge in terms of what it means to manage learning and teaching, and what kind of rethinking, strategic rethinking it would mean for institutions as well. Yeah.
So I think I'm ready. I can share what I wanted to share. So I want to say the race for online teaching and learning. You can see we are all running at our own pace. Each of us is trying to reach the finishing end.
But people from Eldoret are too far.
Yes, yeah, that is why I'm in Eldoret. So that is the race. And I want to say that never be a prisoner of the past, the face-to-face. It was a lesson for that particular time, and it was not a life sentence. Let's see what is coming. I want to finish by saying, never give up. Even if it is so difficult, never give up. We shall reach our destination. Thank you.
Thank you, John. So, Michael, over to you. Maybe you can start with your take-home message and then end with what you wanted to say.
My take-home message is let's put our energies not trying to reinvent the students, but let's reinvent ourselves. We need to start focusing on, as lecturers and as supervisors of postgraduate education, a reimagining of what it means to be in the knowledge enterprise. And if we do that, then we will shift the agenda and find the appropriate pedagogies, of which online technologies and digital platforms actually provide wonderful resources to be able to reimagine. Yeah, so that's my closing take-home message.
Thank you very much, Michael.
In general, if I may move to a vote of thanks, just to say that to design a webinar such as this involves a lot of effort from many different individuals. And I think we started about preparing with this early in March, and it's taken a lot of effort. And I want to say, first of all, thank you to the University of KwaZulu-Natal, who pushed professors to be able to ask the question, let's just not talk about teaching and learning agendas. How are you sustaining the research agenda in the university? And how will you lead seminars and continue to lead seminars? So thanks to our dean, who pushed us in the School of Education, to Professor Thabo Msibi, who made our professors, or gave us the invitation to lead seminars. And it's interestingly that a number of seminars have come out of the School of Education at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, leading a whole range of discussions around what alternative pedagogies, etc., need to come from. So well done, Thabo, making us inspired to take this direction. Then secondly, all the technical administrative staff in the school who circulated invites, and I'm not surprised that we have over 300 people participating in the seminar, even right towards the end of this presentation. And so to the College of Humanities, under whose auspices we work, and so beautiful building that you see there in the background is from our Howard College campus, and that's where the headquarters of the College of Humanities reside. And so thank you to the college office and the DVC of the college, who inspired us to be able to continue this agenda of research. Then I'd like to say specifically to the members of the corporate relations at UKZN, specifically Shakila and Melissa, Mangru and Shakila Taksad, who answered all our questions in terms of all the technological issues. Thank you very much for your support. And then to all the supervisors of the different programs in Moyo University, in Nelson Mandela, in UKZN, and in MIE Mauritius, for the engagement, and also in Germany, Oldenburg colleagues, supervisors have joined us to become part of this discussion. I hope it's been useful. If anything, it's provoked us to ask new questions. But the most important, I would like to thank all members of the panel, and including Johan, who we just roped in at the last minute. Thank you for agreeing to assist us in this particular agenda. And it continues our collaboration. And we have new partners, new ways of thinking about it. So to John, to Paul, to Heileen, and especially to Malvo, who pulled it all together, thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm sure that we will all benefit from debating and arguing about the points we raised. And I'm sure that this will not be the last time we need to meet again in this format. So thank you very much. And so I wish you well. And so Malva, you can close the session.
Yes, thank you, Michael. Thanks everyone, and bye-bye. Hope to see you again.